The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard as Marcus Chen adjusted his camera strap for what felt like the 100th time. He had flown halfway around the world for this trip, spending his entire savings on what he called his dream vacation. London had always fascinated him, and standing just meters away from one of the most famous landmarks in the world made his heart race with excitement. Marcus was a 32-year-old software developer from California who had spent most of his life behind computer screens. Social media was his window to the world, and he had built a modest following by sharing travel photos and funny videos. His followers loved his carefree attitude and the way he pushed boundaries for the perfect shot. Back home, his friends called him fearless. His mother called him reckless. Today, he was about to prove both of them right. The royal guard stood perfectly still in his traditional red tunic and tall bearskin hat. His face showed no emotion, no acknowledgement of the hundreds of tourists snapping photos around him. To Marcus, the guard looked like a statue, a prop placed there for entertainment. He had read online that these guards were trained to ignore distractions, and he wanted to test that theory. His phone was already recording as he edged closer to the guard, grinning at the camera. "Hey guys, Marcus here," he whispered into his phone, his American accent cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "I'm about to see just how serious these guys really are. I mean, they can't actually do anything, right? They're just for show." Several tourists nearby glanced at Marcus with concern. An elderly British couple shook their heads and moved away, clearly disapproving of what they sensed was coming. A family with young children stepped back, the father pulling his kids closer. But Marcus was too focused on his phone screen and his growing view count to notice the warnings in their expressions. He took another step forward, now standing just inches from the painted white line on the ground. The line was there for a reason, marking the boundary that tourists were never supposed to cross. Signs in multiple languages clearly stated the rules, but Marcus had convinced himself they were merely suggestions. In his mind, rules were for people who didn't understand how to create viral content. "Watch this," Marcus said to his phone, his voice louder now, filled with false confidence. He extended his hand slowly toward the guard's rifle, not quite touching it but close enough to make his intentions clear. The guard remained motionless, but something shifted in the atmosphere. The air felt heavier, charged with tension that Marcus was too absorbed in his performance to feel. A security officer in the distance noticed the situation developing and began walking briskly toward the scene. Other tourists were now openly staring, some with their own phones out, sensing that something was about to happen. Marcus interpreted their attention as encouragement. He thought he was entertaining them, giving them a show they would remember. What Marcus failed to understand was the significance of where he stood and who stood before him. The Royal Guard was not a performer or an actor in a costume. He was a fully trained soldier from one of the British Army's most prestigious regiments. These men had served in combat zones around the world. They had protected lives and defended their country in real conflicts. Their ceremonial duties were an honor, not a game, and they took their responsibilities with deadly seriousness. The guard's training kicked in as Marcus's hand moved closer to his weapon. Every guard receives extensive instruction on how to handle situations exactly like this. They learn to assess threats, to differentiate between harmless tourists and genuine dangers, and to respond with appropriate force when necessary. Marcus had no idea that he was seconds away from triggering a response that would change his life forever. Behind his emotionless expression, the guard was making rapid calculations. He had already noted Marcus's position, his body language, his disregard for the clearly marked boundaries, and his hand reaching toward a loaded rifle. These were not the actions of someone taking an innocent photograph. These were the actions of someone who posed a potential threat, whether intentional or not. Marcus took one more step, his foot crossing over the white line. In his mind, he had already won. He imagined the thousands of likes, the comments praising his boldness, maybe even the chance to monetize the video. He was so focused on his future success that he never saw the guard's hand tighten slightly on his rifle. He never noticed the security officer now running toward them. He never heard the gasps from the crowd around him. Time seemed to slow down as Marcus reached forward, his fingers just inches from the guard's weapon. He was smiling, completely unaware that he had just made the worst decision of his trip. The guard's eyes, which had stared straight ahead for the past hour, suddenly shifted. They locked onto Marcus with an intensity that should have stopped him cold. But Marcus was looking at his phone screen, watching himself, admiring his own reflection in the digital mirror he carried everywhere. What happened next would be replayed millions of times across the internet, but not in the way Marcus had imagined. His moment of fame was coming, but it would not be the triumph he had envisioned. Instead, it would become a cautionary tale, a lesson taught to tourists around the world about respect, boundaries, and the consequences of treating real soldiers as if they were characters in a theme park. The guard's voice cut through the air like a blade, sharp and commanding. "Step back!" The words exploded from him with such force that Marcus nearly dropped his phone. The volume was shocking, the tone absolutely devoid of patience or politeness. This was not a request. This was an order from a soldier who expected immediate obedience. Marcus stumbled backward, his face flushing red as tourists all around him turned to stare. His hands trembled as he tried to keep his phone steady. But the video now showed nothing but shaky images of the ground and his own feet shuffling in panic. The confident smile had vanished from his face, replaced by wide-eyed shock and the dawning realization that he had made a terrible mistake. But the guard was not finished. He took a single powerful step forward, his boots striking the cobblestones with a sound like thunder. His rifle, held perfectly throughout the entire confrontation, remained steady in his hands. His eyes, now fully focused on Marcus, carried a message that needed no translation. This was a trained warrior, not a tourist attraction, and Marcus had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. "The line is there for a reason," the guard's voice boomed again, echoing off the surrounding buildings. Every word was precisely articulated, carrying the weight of military discipline and genuine anger. Other guards in the vicinity had noticed the disturbance, and though they remained at their posts, their attention was now alert to any further problems. Security personnel were closing in from multiple directions, their radios crackling with urgent communications. Marcus wanted to run, but his legs felt like they had turned to stone. He stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing without sound, looking like a fish pulled from water. The phone in his hand was still recording, capturing every humiliating second of his disgrace. Around him, the crowd had grown larger, but now they were not watching him with admiration. They were watching with disapproval, some with outright disgust, and others with the kind of second-hand embarrassment that made them look away. A security officer reached Marcus's side within seconds. The man was built like a rugby player, with broad shoulders and an expression that suggested he dealt with foolish tourists every single day. He placed a firm hand on Marcus's shoulder, not roughly but with undeniable authority. "Sir, you need to come with me right now," the officer said, his British accent calm but brooking no argument. Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out as a weak stammer. "I was just taking a video. I didn't mean anything by it. It was just for fun." Even as the words left his mouth, he knew how pathetic they sounded. The security officer's expression did not change. He had heard every excuse imaginable, and Marcus's was not even original. As the officer began to escort Marcus away from the ceremonial area, other tourists started to lower their phones. Some looked relieved that the situation had been handled. Others seemed disappointed that there had not been more drama. A few shook their heads and muttered to each other about disrespectful Americans, which made Marcus feel even worse because he knew they were talking about him. The walk to the security office felt endless. Marcus was aware of every eye on him, every whispered comment, every pointed finger. His phone, still clutched in his sweaty hand, had stopped recording when the battery died, as if even his device had given up on him. The excitement he had felt just minutes ago had evaporated, replaced by a growing sense of dread about what would happen next. Inside a small, plain office with gray walls and harsh fluorescent lighting, Marcus was asked to sit in an uncomfortable plastic chair. The security officer took a position near the door, while another official, a woman with silver hair and the patient expression of someone who had seen everything, sat across from him with a clipboard and pen. "Name and passport, please," she said without preamble. Her voice was not unkind, but it was entirely businesslike. This was not going to be a friendly chat. This was an official incident, and Marcus was at the center of it. As he fumbled for his passport, his hands still shaking, Marcus tried to explain himself again. "Listen, I really didn't know it was such a big deal. I thought the guards were like the ones in the movies, you know? I thought they just stood there and couldn't actually do anything. I wasn't trying to cause trouble. The woman looked up from her clipboard with an expression that managed to be both sympathetic and disappointed at the same time. Mr. Chen, she said, reading from his passport, those men are active-duty soldiers from elite military regiments. They have served in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other conflict zones. They are armed with loaded weapons and have the full authority to use force if they perceive a threat. The fact that you thought they were actors shows a profound lack of understanding and respect. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Loaded weapons. Real soldiers. Afghanistan. The reality of what he had done was finally sinking in, and it was far worse than he had imagined. He had not been pranking a theme park employee. He had been threatening a combat veteran who was authorized to protect himself and his post with lethal force if necessary. I could have been shot, Marcus whispered, the color draining from his face. In extreme circumstances, yes, the woman replied matter-of-factly, though in this case the guard assessed that you were merely ignorant rather than dangerous. You are very fortunate that he showed such restraint. Many tourists do not realize that these soldiers operate under specific rules of engagement. When someone crosses the line and approaches their weapon, they are trained to respond with increasing levels of force. You were given a verbal warning, which is more courtesy than you deserved. Marcus slumped in his chair, feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his life. All his bravado, all his confidence about creating viral content, had led him to this miserable room where he was being lectured about his own stupidity. He thought about his mother's warnings before he left. She had told him to be respectful, to follow rules, to remember that he was a guest in another country. He had laughed off her concerns. Now he wished he had listened. The interview continued for another hour. Marcus had to provide details about where he was staying, how long he would be in the country, and answer questions about his intentions. The woman explained that his behavior could potentially result in charges, though she said they typically reserved legal action for repeat offenders or those who became physically aggressive. Marcus would be receiving an official warning that would remain on record. If you have any further incidents during your stay in the United Kingdom, she said firmly, this warning will be taken into account and the consequences will be significantly more severe. Do you understand? Marcus nodded miserably. Yes, ma'am. I understand. It won't happen again, I promise. When he was finally allowed to leave, Marcus walked out into the London afternoon feeling like a completely different person than the one who had arrived that morning. His dream vacation had turned into a nightmare, and he still had 2 weeks left in the city. Every time he saw a police officer or security guard, he felt a wave of anxiety. Every time he passed other tourists taking photos, he remembered his own foolishness and cringed. That evening, Marcus sat alone in his small hotel room staring at the blank screen of his phone. He had plugged it in to charge hours ago but could not bring himself to turn it on. The thought of what might be waiting for him on social media filled him with sick dread. His live stream had been running when everything happened. Thousands of people had watched him make a fool of himself in real time. When he finally gathered the courage to power on his device, the notifications hit him like a physical blow. Hundreds of comments. Thousands of shares. His video had gone viral exactly as he had wanted, but for all the wrong reasons. People were not praising his boldness. They were mocking his stupidity. Screenshots of his frightened face had already become memes. Someone had added cartoon sound effects to the guard's shout, and that version had been viewed over 1 million times. Marcus scrolled through the comments with growing horror. What an idiot, read one of the kinder ones. This is why other countries hate American tourists, said another. He's lucky he didn't get arrested or worse. Those guards are real soldiers, not Disneyland characters. The criticism went on and on, each comment driving home how badly he had misjudged the situation. But it was not just strangers on the internet who were disappointed in him. His mother had sent him a series of increasingly worried messages after seeing the video shared by one of her friends. His boss had left a voicemail asking if everything was okay, having seen the viral clip on the company's internal chat. Even his friends, the ones who usually encouraged his wild behavior, were sending messages telling him he had gone too far this time. Sleep did not come easily that night. Marcus lay awake replaying the incident over and over in his mind, each memory more humiliating than the last. The guard's powerful voice, the shocked faces of the crowd, the long walk to the security office, the official warning, everything felt surreal. like it had happened to someone else, but the churning anxiety in his stomach reminded him that it had been very real. The next morning, Marcus forced himself to leave the hotel. He had paid for this trip with money he had saved for over a year, and hiding in his room would be wasting not just money, but also the opportunity to actually experience London properly. But as he walked through the streets, he felt hyper-aware of everyone around him. Did they recognize him from the video? Were those people across the street laughing about him? Was that security guard looking at him with extra suspicion? He found himself in a small cafe, nursing a cup of tea he did not really want, when an older British man at the next table leaned over. "Excuse me," the man said in a kind voice, "but you look rather troubled, if you don't mind me saying." Marcus hesitated, then figured he had nothing to lose. "I did something really stupid yesterday," he admitted. "At the palace. With one of the guards." Recognition flickered across the man's face. "Ah, I may have seen something about that online." "Crossed the line, did you?" Marcus nodded miserably. "I thought it would be funny. I thought they were just for show. I had no idea they were actual soldiers." The man stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "Many visitors make that mistake, though perhaps not quite so publicly. My son served in the same regiment, actually. Those lads take their duty very seriously, as well they should. But I imagine you've learned that lesson now, haven't you?" "The hard way," Marcus agreed. "I just wish I could take it back. I embarrassed myself, disrespected someone who deserves respect, and now the whole world has seen it." The older man studied Marcus for a moment before speaking again. "The internet has a funny way of both punishing mistakes and moving on from them rather quickly. In a week, people will be outraged about something else entirely. The question is whether you'll actually learn from this or just wait for it to blow over." Those words stayed with Marcus as he left the cafe. He spent the rest of the day walking through London, really looking at the city for the first time since arriving. He visited museums and read the plaques explaining British military history. He saw exhibits about soldiers who had served in various conflicts, some of whom had later taken on ceremonial duties. He began to understand what the woman in the security office had been trying to tell him. These were not actors or entertainers. They were men and women who had put their lives on the line for their country. Their ceremonial duties were an honor earned through service and sacrifice. By treating the guard as a prop for his video, Marcus had shown profound disrespect not just to one soldier, but to an entire tradition of service. At a memorial honoring fallen soldiers, Marcus stopped and read name after name carved into stone. Some had died in battles that happened before he was born. Others had fallen in conflicts that were still in the news. A few had served in the very regiments responsible for guarding the royal residences. The weight of their sacrifice pressed down on him, making his viral video chase seem incredibly trivial and selfish. That evening, Marcus made a decision. He opened his social media accounts and began typing. His hand shook slightly, but he knew this was something he needed to do. He could not undo what had happened, but he could at least take responsibility for it. "I need to address what happened yesterday at the palace," he wrote. "I crossed a clearly marked line and disrespected a royal guard who was doing his job. I treated him like an entertainment prop instead of the trained soldier he is. There's no excuse for my behavior. I was ignorant, disrespectful, and put both myself and others at risk with my stupid stunt." He continued typing, choosing his words carefully. "Those guards are real military personnel who have served in combat zones. They carry loaded weapons and have every right to protect themselves and their posts. I'm incredibly fortunate that the guard showed restraint and that I only received a warning. I could have faced much more serious consequences, which I would have deserved." Marcus paused, reading over what he had written. It was not enough, but it was a start. "To anyone planning to visit London or any place with ceremonial guards, please respect the rules and boundaries. These people are not there for our entertainment. They deserve our respect. I learned this lesson in the most humiliating way possible, but at least I learned it. I hope others can learn from my mistake without having to repeat it." He hit post before he could second-guess himself. Within minutes, new comments began appearing, but these were different from before. Some people appreciated his apology. Others said it was too little too late. A few accused him of only apologizing because he got caught. Marcus read them all, accepting both the praise and the criticism, knowing that he had earned all of it. The next day brought an unexpected development. A message appeared in his inbox from someone claiming to be a retired royal guard. "I served for 12 years, the message read, and I appreciate your apology. Too many tourists treat us poorly and never think twice about it. The fact that you've reflected on your actions and taken responsibility shows character. I hope you enjoy the rest of your time in London with a new perspective." Marcus stared at the message for a long time, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that someone from that world had acknowledged his apology, shame that it had taken such a public mistake to force him to grow up, gratitude that he had been given another chance to do better. Marcus spent the following days exploring London with a completely different attitude. Instead of looking for viral moments and boundary-pushing content, he actually absorbed the history and culture around him. He visited the Imperial War Museum and spent hours reading about the experiences of soldiers throughout British history. He learned about the formation of the Guard regiments, their role in major conflicts, and the rigorous selection process soldiers underwent to earn ceremonial positions. At the museum, a volunteer guide noticed Marcus's intense interest in the Guard regiment displays. The guide was an elderly woman named Margaret, who had worked at the museum for over 20 years. "Are you particularly interested in military history?" she asked pleasantly. Marcus hesitated before answering honestly. "I had an incident with one of the Royal Guards a few days ago. I disrespected him badly, and I'm trying to understand what I did wrong and why it matters so much." Margaret's expression grew thoughtful. "Would you like to hear a story?" she asked, gesturing to a bench near one of the exhibits. "I have some time before the next tour group arrives." They sat down and Margaret began to speak in her gentle voice. "My nephew served as a Royal Guard about 15 years ago. Before that posting, he had been deployed to Iraq twice. He saw things there that no young person should ever have to see. He lost friends. He came home with injuries both visible and invisible. When he was selected for guard duty, his entire family was so proud. It meant he was still serving, but in a safer capacity that honored his previous service." She paused, gathering her thoughts. But the duty was not easy, even though it looked simple from the outside. He had to stand perfectly still for hours in all weather conditions while tourists treated him like a statue. People would make faces at him, trying to get him to laugh. Some would touch him or his uniform without permission. A few even made crude gestures or comments. Every single day he had to maintain his composure and dignity, while being treated as less than human by people who should have known better. Marcus felt his throat tighten as he listened. "I did exactly that," he admitted quietly. "I treated the guard like he was just part of the scenery, something for me to use in my videos." Margaret nodded. "The difference is that you're here now learning. My nephew eventually had to leave the service due to his injuries, but he always said that some of the hardest days were not in combat zones but standing guard while being disrespected by tourists. At least in combat, the enemy was clear. At the palace, people who should have been grateful for his service instead treated him as entertainment." The conversation left Marcus deeply affected. He thanked Margaret for sharing her nephew's story and walked through the rest of the museum with new eyes. Every display about military service, every photograph of soldiers in various eras, reminded him that real people with real sacrifices stood behind the uniforms and ceremonies. Over the next few days, Marcus's viral video gradually faded from the top trending spots, replaced by new controversies and moments. His follower count had actually increased, though he suspected many of the new followers were there to mock him rather than support him. He found himself caring less about the numbers than he ever had before. The metrics that had once seemed so important now felt hollow and meaningless. On his 10th day in London, Marcus did something that terrified him. He returned to the palace. His hands were sweaty, and his heart raced as he approached the same courtyard where everything had happened. This time he stayed well behind the white line. He did not pull out his phone to record. He simply watched the changing of the guard ceremony with quiet respect. The precision of the movements, the discipline required to maintain formation. The pride evident in every gesture became clear to him now. This was not a performance for tourists. This was a military operation carried out with the same seriousness as any other duty. The tourists around him chatted and took photos, but Marcus noticed that most of them stayed behind the lines, showed basic respect and moved along without incident. After the ceremony, Marcus noticed a young boy, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, tugging on his father's sleeve and pointing at one of the guards. The father bent down and Marcus overheard him explaining quietly, "That soldier is working very hard. He's protecting important places and people. We need to be respectful and stay where we're supposed to stay. Can you do that? The little boy nodded seriously, looking at the guard with wide eyes full of admiration rather than mischief. Marcus felt a pang of shame at the contrast. A small child understood basic respect better than he had as a grown adult. The father was teaching his son the lesson that Marcus had needed to learn the hard way. As Marcus walked away from the palace, he felt a strange sense of closure. He could never undo what he had done, but he could at least say that he had returned, had watched properly, and had shown the respect that should have been there from the beginning. It was a small step, but it felt important. That afternoon, sitting in a park with actual pigeons instead of internet followers for company, Marcus reflected on how much had changed in just over a week. He had come to London chasing viral fame, convinced that pushing boundaries and breaking rules made him interesting. Instead, he had learned that true respect, understanding, and humility were far more valuable than any number of likes or shares. His phone buzzed with a notification. Another message about the video, probably, but Marcus ignored it. He was watching an elderly couple feeding the birds, holding hands like they had done this 1,000 times before. There was something beautiful in that simple, unfilmed moment, something real that no amount of viral content could capture or replace. When Marcus finally checked his messages later, he found one from his mother. "I saw your apology online," she had written. "I'm proud that you owned up to your mistake. That takes more courage than most people think. I hope you're actually enjoying London now instead of just trying to perform it for strangers on the internet." Marcus smiled for the first time in days. His mother understood exactly what had happened and what needed to happen next. He typed a response. "I'm learning, Mom, slowly, but I'm learning. And yes, London is actually amazing when you stop treating it like a backdrop for social media. I should have listened to you before I left. I should have listened to a lot of things." Her response came quickly. "The best lessons are the ones we learn ourselves, even if they're hard. Come home wiser than you left. That's all any parent can hope for." Marcus spent the rest of his time in London being the tourist he should have been from the start. He visited historical sites and actually read the information plaques. He tried local food without photographing every meal. He had conversations with people without thinking about how it would look online. He even left his phone in the hotel room for an entire day, choosing to experience the city with his own eyes rather than through a screen. On one of his last days, he found himself back at the cafe where he had spoken with the older gentleman. The man was not there, but Marcus remembered their conversation about learning from mistakes rather than just waiting for them to blow over. He had tried to do both, and he hoped that he had succeeded at least partially. The flight home gave Marcus 13 hours to think about everything that had happened. He sat squeezed into an economy seat between a sleeping businessman and a woman reading a thriller novel, watching clouds pass by outside the tiny window. England grew smaller beneath him until it disappeared entirely, but the lessons he had learned there remained heavy in his heart. When he landed in California, his mother was waiting at the arrivals gate. She hugged him tightly without saying anything about the video, the incident, or the embarrassment. She just held her son and then asked if he was hungry. Over burgers at a diner near the airport, Marcus told her everything. Not the sanitized version he might have shared on social media, but the real, messy, humiliating truth of what had happened and how it had changed him. "I was so focused on getting views and likes that I forgot basic human decency," he said, pushing fries around his plate. "I treated a real person like he was just content for my channel. And the worst part is I had done stuff like that before, just never with consequences. I thought being bold and breaking rules made me interesting. I was wrong about everything." His mother listened without interrupting, letting him get it all out. When he finished, she reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "The Marcus who got on that plane to London couldn't have told me all this," she said gently. That version of my son would have blamed the guard for overreacting, or complained about the rules being too strict. "You've grown up a lot in 2 weeks. That's worth more than any viral video." Returning to work was harder than Marcus expected. His co-workers had all seen the video. Some made jokes, though not unkindly. Others pretended it had never happened. His boss called him into the office on his first day back, and Marcus braced himself for a lecture or possibly worse. Instead, his boss, a woman named Jennifer who had always been fair but firm, asked him a simple question. "What did you learn from this experience?" Marcus thought carefully before answering. I learned that other people aren't props for my entertainment. I learned that rules exist for good reasons, not just to limit fun. I learned that real courage isn't about pushing boundaries for attention. It's about taking responsibility when you mess up. And I learned that who I was becoming online wasn't someone I actually wanted to be. Jennifer nodded slowly. I asked because we were concerned about how this reflected on the company. Several clients saw the video and recognized you from our team page. But your public apology and the way you've handled the aftermath showed maturity. Everyone makes mistakes, Marcus. What matters is what you do afterward. Consider this a learning experience and move forward. Marcus felt relief wash over him, but also a renewed sense of shame that his actions had potentially affected his workplace. He thanked Jennifer and promised to be more thoughtful about his online presence, especially as it related to his professional life. That weekend, Marcus did something he had been dreading. He made a new video for his channel. Not a flashy production or a controversial stunt, just him sitting in his apartment, talking directly to the camera with no filters and no performance. A few weeks ago, I made a video that went viral for all the wrong reasons, he began. I've apologized publicly, but I wanted to talk about what happened in a more detailed way, because I think there are important things to discuss beyond just my personal embarrassment. He spoke for nearly 20 minutes about respect, about the difference between confidence and arrogance, about the dangers of chasing viral fame at any cost. He talked about the Royal Guard as a real person, with a real military background, not as a character or obstacle in a video game. He shared some of what he had learned at the museum and from speaking with people in London. I'm not going to stop making content, Marcus continued, but I'm changing what kind of content I make and why I make it. I want to create things that add value or entertainment, without disrespecting others or breaking rules that exist for good reasons. If that means I don't go viral as often, I'm okay with that. I'd rather have a smaller audience who's there for the right reasons than a huge following based on me being disrespectful or reckless. He ended the video with a final thought. If you're someone who likes pushing boundaries and testing limits for content, ask yourself who might get hurt in the process, not just physically but emotionally or professionally. Is the video really worth it? For me, the answer is no. I hope others can learn from my mistake without having to make it themselves. The response to this video was mixed. Some longtime followers accused him of becoming boring or selling out. Others appreciated his honesty and growth. A few comments came from people who admitted they had been planning similar stunts and had reconsidered after seeing his experience. Those comments made Marcus feel like maybe, just maybe, something good had come from his humiliation. Marcus also made a private decision that he did not share publicly. He found a military veterans organization and signed up to volunteer. Not for content, not for recognition, just because he wanted to do something meaningful. He spent Saturday mornings at a VA center, helping with whatever was needed, organizing donated items, talking with veterans, assisting with technology problems, or sometimes just listening to stories. One of the veterans he met was a man named Robert who had served in the British Army before immigrating to the United States. When Robert learned that Marcus had recently been to London, he asked about the trip. Marcus hesitated, then decided to be honest. He told Robert the whole story, including the part about disrespecting the Royal Guard. Robert was quiet for a long moment. Marcus braced himself for anger or disgust, but instead, the older man smiled slightly. You know what the real difference is between you and the dozens of other tourists who do similar things every year? Robert asked. You actually learned from it. Most people just complain about getting yelled at or blame the guard for doing his job. The fact that you came here to volunteer with veterans tells me the lesson actually stuck. Those words meant more to Marcus than thousands of likes on social media ever had. He had not just apologized with words. He had changed his actions. He was becoming a different person, the kind of person he could respect when he looked in the mirror. Months passed. The video faded further into internet history, occasionally resurfacing when someone compiled lists of tourist mistakes but no longer defining Marcus's online presence. He continued creating content, but it was different now. Less about shock value and more about genuine experiences. Less about him performing and more about the places and people he encountered. His follower count did not explode the way it had when he was chasing controversy, but it grew steadily with people who actually engaged with his content in meaningful ways. The comment section became a place for real discussions instead of just emojis and memes. Marcus found himself enjoying the creative process again, in a way he had not since he first started making videos years ago. One evening, while editing a video about local hiking trails, Marcus received a message on social media from someone with a British flag in their profile. "I was one of the tourists watching when you had your incident with the Royal Guard." The message read, "I wanted you to know that I've been following your content since then, and I'm impressed by how you've handled everything. You could have doubled down on being defensive, but instead you actually grew from the experience. That takes real character." Marcus read the message several times, feeling a warmth spread through his chest that no viral video had ever given him. He replied with genuine thanks, and they ended up having a brief but pleasant conversation about London and travel in general. It was a small moment, but it represented something bigger. Redemption not through forgetting the past, but through learning from it. His volunteering at the VA center became a regular part of his life. He formed genuine friendships with several veterans, listening to their stories and slowly understanding the depth of sacrifice that military service required. These conversations gave him perspective that he had lacked before, a window into experiences far removed from his comfortable life behind computer screens. Robert, the British veteran, became something of a mentor to Marcus. They would often grab coffee after volunteer sessions, and Robert would share stories from his time in the service. Some were funny, some were heartbreaking. All of them were real in a way that Marcus's curated online life had never been. "You know," Robert said one afternoon, stirring sugar into his tea, "the military teaches you something that civilians often struggle with: the difference between courage and bravado. Courage is doing what needs to be done despite your fear. Bravado is doing risky things to prove something to yourself or others. What you did in London was bravado. What you did afterward, owning up to it and changing your behavior, that was courage." Marcus absorbed these words like a sponge. Every conversation with Robert, every Saturday at the VA center, every video he made with intention rather than impulse, was rebuilding him into someone better. The person he was becoming felt more authentic than the persona he had created for social media. Nearly a year after the incident, Marcus found himself back in England. This time it was not for vacation or content creation. He had been invited to speak at a small conference about digital responsibility and the impact of social media culture. The organizers had seen his transformation and thought his story could help others understand the real-world consequences of chasing viral fame. Standing backstage before his presentation, Marcus felt the familiar flutter of nerves. But this was different from the anxiety he had felt before. This was not about performing or getting approval. This was about sharing something important, something that might actually help people avoid the mistakes he had made. When he walked onto the stage, he saw about 200 faces looking back at him, young people mostly, aspiring content creators and social media enthusiasts. They looked eager and excited, probably much like he had looked a year ago. Marcus took a breath and began his story, not with the viral video, but with who he had been before London. "I thought respect was for people who were afraid to take risks," he told the audience. "I thought rules were obstacles designed to keep life boring. I thought the only thing that mattered was how many people were watching me, not whether what they were watching had any value. I was wrong about all of it, and I'm going to tell you exactly how I learned that." He showed the viral video, watching as the audience reacted with gasps and uncomfortable laughter. He saw himself through their eyes, this foolish tourist treating a soldier like a prop. It still stung to watch, but the sting was more bearable now, tempered by everything that had come after. Marcus spoke about the shame, the fear, the official warning. He shared what he had learned at the museum, the conversations with veterans, the slow process of understanding that other people were not supporting characters in his personal story. He was honest about how hard it had been to change, how his first instinct had been to make excuses, and how grateful he was that people had called him out. "The internet can make us forget that there are real humans on the other side of our cameras and screens," he said, his voice carrying across the quiet auditorium. That Royal Guard was not an NPC in a video game. He was a person with a history, with experiences I could never imagine, with a job that I had no right to interfere with. Every person you encounter, whether in person or online, deserves that basic recognition of their humanity. During the question period, a young woman raised her hand. But don't you think social media is all about pushing boundaries? How do you create interesting content if you're always worried about respecting everyone? Marcus smiled, appreciating the honest question. I don't think respecting people and creating interesting content are opposites, he answered. There are infinite ways to be creative without disrespecting others or breaking rules that exist for safety and order. The problem is that shock value and controversy often get rewarded with attention, so it's easy to fall into that trap. But attention without respect is hollow. Trust me, I learned that the hard way. Another hand went up, this one from a teenage boy. Did you ever think about just deleting everything and starting over with a new account? Yes, Marcus admitted. Many times. But running away from your mistakes doesn't help you grow from them. The video is still out there. People can still find it. But now when they do, they also find my apology, my changed content, and hopefully evidence that people can learn and do better. I'd rather be known as someone who messed up and grew than someone who just disappeared. After the presentation, several attendees approached Marcus with their own stories. Some admitted they had done similar things and never thought about the consequences. Others thanked him for being honest about his journey. One young man said he had been planning a series of boundary-pushing videos and was now reconsidering his approach. That evening, Marcus did something he had been nervous about all day. He returned to the palace, the scene of his greatest humiliation. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the historic buildings. Tourists were still taking photos, still admiring the guards, but everything looked different to him now. Marcus stood behind the white line, watching a guard who was probably close to his own age. The young man stood perfectly still, his face expressionless, maintaining the discipline and bearing that Marcus now understood required immense strength. Marcus did not take out his phone. He did not try to get closer. He simply stood there, offering the respect he should have given a year ago. As he turned to leave, Marcus noticed a family nearby. The father was taking photos while the children ran around excitedly. The youngest, a girl of about 6, started to duck under the rope barrier. Her older brother grabbed her hand and pulled her back. "You can't go past the line," the boy said seriously. "The guard is working. We have to respect him." Marcus felt tears prick his eyes unexpectedly. That little boy understood something that he had failed to grasp as an adult. But he understood it now, and that made all the difference. Walking through London that night, Marcus thought about how much had changed and how much he had changed with it. The city was beautiful in the evening light, full of history and life and stories that had nothing to do with him. He was just one person passing through, and there was something freeing about accepting that smallness, that insignificance in the grand scheme of things. On his last morning in London, Marcus woke up early and went for a walk. He found himself near a small memorial garden dedicated to military service members. Fresh flowers had been placed at the base of a monument, and the morning dew made everything sparkle in the early light. Marcus sat on a bench and just breathed, thinking about all the lessons he had learned. His phone was in his pocket, but he did not reach for it. He did not need to capture this moment or share it with anyone. It was enough to simply be there, to feel the morning air, to sit in quiet reflection. The old Marcus would have found this boring. The new Marcus understood it was exactly what he needed. When he finally returned home to California, Marcus felt like he was bringing closure to a chapter of his life. He had gone to London twice as 2 different people. The first time, he had been a foolish tourist chasing internet fame. The second time, he had been someone trying to make amends and learn from his mistakes. Both versions of himself were part of his story, but only one represented who he wanted to be moving forward. At his next Saturday volunteer session at the VA Center, Robert noticed something different about Marcus. "You seem lighter," the older man observed. "Like you've put down something heavy you'd been carrying." Marcus nodded. "I went back to London, gave a talk about what happened, visited the palace again. It felt like completing a circle, you know? I can't change what I did, but I can move forward knowing I did everything possible to make it right and learn from it." Robert clapped him on the shoulder. "That's all any of us can do, son. Make mistakes, learn from them, try to do better. You're going to be all right." Months turned into another year. Marcus's content continued to evolve, focusing more on thoughtful exploration and genuine human connection. He never became the mega influencer he had once dreamed of being, but he built a community of followers who valued substance over shock value. His comment sections became places for real discussions about travel, culture, and respecting different people and places. The viral video still existed, floating somewhere in the vast ocean of internet content. Occasionally, someone would discover it and comment on his current videos, asking if he was the same person. Marcus always responded honestly, yes, that was him, yes, he deeply regretted it, and yes, he had worked hard to learn and grow from that experience. Sometimes young content creators would reach out asking for advice. Marcus always told them the same thing. Create content that adds value. Respect the people and places you encounter. And remember that viral fame is fleeting, but character is permanent. Some listened, some did not. Marcus understood that everyone had to walk their own path and learn their own lessons. One evening, nearly 2 years after the original incident, Marcus received an unexpected message. It was from someone claiming to have served as a royal guard during the time of Marcus's visit. The message was brief but meaningful. I wasn't the guard you encountered, but I served alongside him. He never held a grudge. He understood that tourists sometimes make mistakes out of ignorance rather than malice. He'd be pleased to know you learned from the experience. We all make mistakes. What defines us is what we do afterward. Marcus read the message 3 times, feeling a weight he did not know he was still carrying lift from his shoulders. He had apologized publicly, changed his behavior, and tried to make amends in every way he could think of. But he had always wondered what the guard himself thought. This message, while not directly from him, offered a kind of forgiveness that Marcus had not known he needed. He typed a careful response, thanking the person for reaching out and asking them to pass along his respect and apology, if they ever had the chance. Then Marcus closed his laptop and sat in the quiet of his apartment, feeling something like peace settle over him. The journey from foolish tourist to thoughtful creator had not been easy or quick. There had been many moments of shame, doubt, and difficulty along the way, but Marcus had emerged from it as a better person, someone who understood the weight of his